Good afternoon, everyone. I am delighted to be here introducing this webinar today, being hosted by Healthy Caribbean Youth, the youth arm of Healthy Caribbean Coalition. The webinar is entitled Cultivating Healthy School Environments, Exploring Physical Activity Opportunities. Physical inactivity is one of the 4 leading risk factors for NCDs. And we know that when we increase physical activity, there are tremendous health benefits, both physical health benefits and mental health benefits. Young people, the focus of this webinar today, have unacceptably low levels of physical activity, and this is borne out by the data. This was highlighted recently in a letter that was launched by the HCC and regional pediatricians, remarking how COVID has indeed exacerbated this situation, leading to increased sedentary behavior, low levels of physical activity, and resulting mental health challenges. So this is an issue that we need to start discussing more. School environments play a really critical role in shaping healthy behaviors amongst our children and young adults. And we had an intern here about a year ago, Alyssa Turp, who undertook an assessment of the barriers to physical activity in school environments. And we're going to hear more about those barriers today from our excellent panel. And we're also going to hear about solutions that we can work towards to create active schools and active communities. Before we get into that, I'm going to go through some housekeeping items with you. There's a Q&A function which can be used for questions, and we prefer that you'd use this as opposed to the chat function because it allows our panelists to answer your questions in real time. We have 2 fantastic moderators today, Ms. Danielle Walwyn. Danielle is our advocacy officer and our in-house fitness guru, and we also have Mr. Pierre Cook Jr., who is HCC's Youth Voices Technical Advisor. Danielle and Pierre, over to you.
Thank you so much, Maisha, and good afternoon to everyone. Extra special welcome. I'm so pleased to be moderating our very first panel today. So we'll have one of 2 focused on active schools. And so when we're thinking about the school environment, we understand how important it is in cultivating healthy behaviors, specifically positive associations with physical activity. And as Maisha mentioned, there are so many benefits to being active: mental, social, physical, and as we're talking about students, we have to acknowledge that there are cognitive benefits as well. So there's so many benefits to think about. And in our conversations today, as we're talking about physical activity in school, I want us to think about a whole of school approach, thinking about how we can integrate physical activity, not just through physical education, but throughout the school day. Yes, and so I'm very pleased to be introducing our panelists for today for the first panel. So firstly, we have Miss Lonnie Richards. She is a physical education teacher in Antigua and Barbuda, in secondary school in Antigua and Barbuda, and she has a Master of Science degree in sport and exercise. So we're pleased to have Lonnie. We also have Mr. Tahir Babulia, who is the Barbados ambassador for the International Sport Federation. So we're happy to have him, International University Sport Federation, excuse me. So we're very happy to have him as well. And then of course we have Danielle Treasure. She is a 6th form student, competitive swimmer who has represented Barbados both regionally and internationally. So welcome to our panelists. I'd invite our panelists to turn on their cameras. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hello.
And so as we're going along the discussion today, I'm really encouraging all of our attendees to share kind of your thoughts on things that are working for you. Of course, we have our panelists who are speaking from Antigua and Barbuda and Barbadian perspective, but we want to know what's happening in your country. We want to know what you're doing to get your communities active. Let us know if any of their points resonate with you. Yeah, so we'll start with our active schools panel, focusing on the barriers to physical activity as well as solutions, because we do want this to be a solution-based conversation. So to start us off, Danielle, or all of our panelists really, what are some barriers to being active in school? And let's think first off of pre-COVID, and then we're going to touch on COVID. So totally up to you. Danielle, put it to you first.
Okay, hi. Yeah, so pre-COVID, when we could go into school and when we could exercise in big groups, there was still a lack of physical activity, and that was also seen in physical education. And so for me as a student, what I noticed, some of the barriers that stopped kids from being physically active in PE, noticed that the curriculum was quite repetitive and very sports oriented. So that really reduced the amount of student engagement, especially among females. They tend to not participate as much. There's a lack of facilities and equipment, along with the time of day, if you're exercising in extreme heat. PE was once a day, once a week, which is definitely not enough physical activity for the week. It wasn't taken seriously, like compared to math and English. It was more seen as a free period to do whatever you wanted. And people weren't taking that activity outside of school and being active outside of school. Along with, you had too many kids in one class and not enough supervision. So it was quite easy for kids to sit out while going unnoticed. And so that's just a few of the things I noticed as a student.
Thanks so much, Danielle. So you had a little bit of considering the actual curriculum, considering the actual facilities and equipment that's available in school. To hear, I know you're in a university school environment. Do any of these, are any of these barriers similar, different?
Hi, good afternoon all. First of all, let me thank you, Danielle, and the Healthy Caribbean Coalition for inviting me to be a part of this esteemed panel. And I just want to offer my gratitude to you and the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. Yes, at the university level, we definitely have some similar issues, but thankfully the University of the West Indies has seen the importance of sports and physical activity. And with the introduction of the Faculty of Sport back in 2017, they've made a more concerted effort to push recreational participation and physical activity to help students obviously deal and cope with day-to-day challenges. But one of the main issues that we are faced with, students and the administrators alike, is that the scheduling of classes, scheduling timetables are so compact. Some days you run from 9 till 9. Some days you go from 10 o'clock till 9 o'clock at night. And there's nowhere in between for you to have any time for yourself to participate in physical activity, exercise, or even personal development, or even to get what you want to have to do, like go to the supermarket or anything of sorts done. So students are forced to now make that choice. When there's a structured physical activity time or training for a sport, students are forced to make the choice. Should I go to class or should I participate in physical activity? So that is a challenge that we are faced with at the university. But from a sporting point of view, UWI has definitely taken the lead in sports and sport development within the Caribbean and on all 5 campuses. And that is one issue and one challenge we are faced with, and we can go into the solution after, Danielle.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for that. So again, kind of even something that Danielle alluded to with the scheduling, and again, thinking of this whole of society approach that we need to integrate physical activity throughout the school day, prioritize it throughout the school day. Okay, some good thoughts. And then Lane, so you're coming in as a physical education teacher in a secondary school in Antigua. What are some barriers that you've noticed from your perspective?
So I've noticed that as Danielle would have mentioned, the amount of time that's dedicated to physical activity, especially in the secondary school, because at that level, there is a great focus on kind of just getting the curriculum done. And even sometimes in physical education, kind of trying to push the theoretical component of it as well, it's understandable because as was mentioned, if you have it once a week, then you're still trying to balance the theory and the practical at the same time. So that's one of the issues that I think I would face, as well as a lack of dedicated playing space. For my school specifically, I'm not sure if it's the only one, but it's the only one to my knowledge, where in terms of the government secondary school, where we do not have any physical space. So there's no space dedicated to physical activity, because it's just impossible, right? There's a lot of infrastructure that's there. And unfortunately, there wasn't any left for PE or any sort of physical activity. So I think something like having multi-purpose courts and facilities would also be useful. And that is also a barrier because physical education involves sports as well as part of the curriculum. And if there's no space, then there's definitely no space to have any sort of courts or even multi-purpose facilities that can be used for varying sports or even for any sort of physical activity as well. I think persons have also, especially with the pandemic, they've also become accustomed to a more sort of sedentary lifestyle. They've been doing a lot of remote learning. And so the need to be up and going has kind of gone because they're at home and they're behind a computer. And it's really easy to kind of get into the trap of sitting down and being on your computer and watching Netflix and that kind of, you know, those sort of activities. So that has also played a role in addition to the lack of self-efficacy. So students don't necessarily have the belief that they can be sports persons or they can be physically active, in that they don't think that they can do it properly. And so because they don't, then they tend not to try. And with that creates a challenge, as Daniel mentioned earlier as well. If you kind of think, okay, well, this is for, you know, well, you tend to find the girls tend not to be the ones to participate. Of course, it's not to say that they're not girls who don't participate, but you would find the girls are the ones who tend to sit out more than the boys. And that's because they figure, you know, I can't kick, I can hit, I can't run, I can't, you know, do whatever it is that is required of them. And that is definitely a barrier, in addition to the lack of role models for physical activities. So we know that, you know, if I ask my class, what are some of the ways that you can be physically active or that you've seen physical activity, you'd hear, oh, my parents exercise or they go to the gym to lose weight. And so outside of losing weight, or even playing maybe professionally or even a semi-professional level, they don't really see physical activity as anything other than a weight loss or competitive, you know, activity. So those are some of the challenges that I think that I face in Antigua.
Thanks so much, Lane and Tahir and Danielle. So I think so far we've heard that they're personal attributes, so that lack of motivation, lack of self-efficacy, but then we're also hearing that they're environmental barriers as well. So again, mentioning the equipment, the facilities, just having dedicated space so that we can have quality physical education classes. So excellent so far. And I think, Lane, one of the points that you brought up too is just this understanding of what physical activity is. Yeah, so having an understanding that it includes sports, it includes exercise, but then we also just have movement. So I know that's something we're going to touch on throughout the webinar, but excellent so far. And so we've kind of given an overview of the barriers that exist pre-COVID. And then I know we have some unique barriers that Lane already started to speak about during COVID. So Danielle, perhaps you could go first. Can you just give us an idea of, you know, in addition to those barriers you mentioned before, some COVID unique barriers?
Yeah, so the same barriers also apply during COVID, and there's additional barriers as well. First of all kids need devices in order to participate in this PE. And also the sports that are done in the curriculum, most of them can't be done at your home because there's not enough space. So you get a repetition of doing the same things online in PE, even if there might not even be PE. Sometimes you find that because kids don't have the devices, there's no PE online. And so that's definitely a barrier that you face.
And here I'm seeing you nodding your head. Something that resonates with you or anything additional?
Yes, for sure. And Lanie's point of the notion of what physical education is, that it's just sports, is still very much the same throughout the Caribbean. And we really need to push the idea that physical education goes past sports, and that we need to get our students involved in a theoretical aspect of physical education. You see at the CXC level and the CAPE level now, and students, and this is where we need to go with sports in the Caribbean, that is no longer just on the field of play, but it's off the field as well. You could become a sport accountant, you could become a sport marketer, you could become a sport commentator. And I see Mr. Samuel Badri in the panel, in the attendance, and he's a commentator. He used to play cricket, but now he's commentating now. And there are countless other examples of persons who not only made it on the field of play, but off the field as well. So you have sports biologists, and you have sports doctors, and you have sports lawyers, and there are countless other examples of persons. And this is now where we need to go in the Caribbean, that we have to build an industry that is no longer sports, is no longer just played on the field of play, but off the field, where our students from the primary and secondary school level can have an opportunity to learn about sports, physical education, and the opportunities, because then this can open up to jobs in the future. This can definitely open up to a widening of our economy. This can help our health crisis in the future. This can help combat NCDs and childhood obesity when we get more students exercising. And on Danielle's points, we need to be creative and innovative. One of the models that we use at the university this year from a student point of view is that we have a year full of academic activities, week of activities out of the clubs and the societies. A lot of these were forced to go online, obviously with the transfer of class online. So what these persons, what the clubs and societies did, they put on different creative and innovative ways of exercising, such as yoga, Zumba, dance exercise, which is popular now. And this is where we need to go. We need to get to the level of where our students are at and where our kids are at and bring them in. And what happened was that it was a benefit. It was a benefit in the end that our students who would not normally come out because of the reasons Lonnie would have mentioned, that they may be shamed, they may not want to come out and exercise or participate in a sport, but they were doing it from the luxury of their home. And these exercise events were the most popular and most well attended, so much so that the students are asking for more. Why are there not more? Why are there no more exercise activities? So this is where we need to go. We need to get creative and innovative in the way we think and get to these students and get to their level and engage them and get them exercising and participating.
A passionate physical activity advocate. Thanks so much here. So you mentioned needing to engage students, ensure that students are part of the conversation when developing physical activity, activities needing to be creative and innovative. So you've already hit us off with a really strong start to our solutions kind of conversation. And so Danielle, in addition, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Oh, yeah. So I think it's also engaging not everyone. So also the females who, as mentioned, might not want to participate because of the many reasons. First, the social stigma. They might feel that girls shouldn't look muscular. They shouldn't be tough and do sports. The sports in PE tend to be more geared towards what males prefer. Females might prefer different sports and they might not be as comfortable doing those sports. Definitely adequate clothing, having an appropriate and positive environment would definitely help females. And as well as judgment, that I think that was mentioned. Females feel like they're being judged if they're not good, or they don't want to do it because they don't want to look silly when they do it. And also, we also mentioned that females, they don't realize the benefit of physical education, so they might just use that as a free period and do classes because they feel that it's more beneficial than participating in PE.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Danielle. So what you bring up too is, you know, when we're looking at trying to increase physical activity among our community members, we have to look at who are least active or who have challenges. And you've highlighted an important group, which tend to be girls. You've kind of highlighted all the reasons why and solutions why. So again, involving them in the conversation, having them kind of contribute as to what they would like to do to be active. Excellent. Lonnie, any additional thoughts and just solutions, and like you as a physical education teacher, how can we get our students more active?
I would say that one of the things that we could do is to include physical activity outside of the physical activity, well, the physical education scheduled time, and look at it as something that becomes a way of life. So in terms of perhaps having maybe facilities, so quite a lot of communities, at least here in Antigua, have facilities, And so they're able to utilize those facilities to do things. Obviously with the pandemic and the restrictions and the constant changes, they're not going to be able to use those facilities. But if you have sufficient yard space, you can always just play with your family, take walks, do things together, so it doesn't feel as though it's a chore, but rather it's just another activity that you do throughout the day. Also a lot sporting and playing equipment for students to use during leisure time during the school day. So normally you have a break. For us, we have one break during the school day. And so with that break, you have to eat, you have to maybe transition, whatever it is that you're doing, but it generally tends to be a time for you to socialize, but not through sports or any sort of physical activity. So I think providing equipment that is specific for leisure time is also quite beneficial because, as a PE teacher, you're not going to give them the balls or the bats or whatever it is, because the likelihood is that it could be lost or it could be damaged. And I know I can say that from experience, even just from my classes alone. And so because of that, you tend not to want to lend them out because they're, those resources and equipment tend to be a bit scarce. So we have like skipping ropes, we have maybe little tennis balls or whatever the case is. Those tend to be very useful. And also incorporate physical activity into the classroom where possible. One of the things that I've done once or twice, I will admit, I don't necessarily do them as often as I probably could, but something that you could do like a really good introduction or kind of, not necessarily an icebreaker, but a good way to start the session, I find, is to do some stretches, hands up, hands out, hands in, hands down, mix it up a bit, have a little sit or a stand activity where maybe standing means sitting and sitting means standing. And I found that I've gotten a really good response to that. And it also helps them to kind of just start thinking and focusing a little bit more before they start their classwork or whatever activity is scheduled for the day. And I think also by building self-efficacy, building their belief that they can perform a task is very important. And so it doesn't have to be sports. And so it can be something like playing rounders. It could be playing kickball. It could be even maybe jogging around the field or whatever area it is that you have. And I've found as well that they're really beneficial, and especially like a first form level or the lower school levels, to kind of get students more comfortable with kicking a ball. You don't have to have them play football, but you can just get them accustomed to just kicking the ball from point A to point B, kicking it back, hitting the ball. Rounders is always very fun because it's something that they grew up doing, and it's a game that's familiar to them. And I think that makes it even better if you're able to incorporate childhood games, or even, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with Here Comes Jackie on the Pony. It is an excellent warm-up activity, excellent. And they just, they jump in because these are things that they know. And they know that they don't really realize that it's physical activity until they start sweating. And then they go, oh, that was really tiring. So I think those are some really easy ways that physical activity could be incorporated into the general school day and even in their everyday life. So parents, pull the children along. Don't just go on a walk to just lose weight, but just go on a walk for fun, for family time, or even go to the beach, go swimming, go hiking, go running, whatever it is. And you can just do it as a family so that your children become more accustomed to being physically active.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lane. So you touched on, I think all of our panelists have this element of fun and needing to make movement fun. You've touched on, and all of you have, the need to prioritize the physical activity environment and resources. And I also think bringing up your point on just needing to build confidence, right? And again, incorporating those fun games to be able to do that, and doing that from a young age. Again, this is why we're prioritizing the school environment, because it's the perfect place to really start to build those positive associations with physical activity. On that note, are there any final thoughts from our panelists before we head into the Q&A? I know we have another panel coming up.
Yes, just quickly, Danielle, I definitely know, Lonnie, about losing the ball when you hit the cricket ball over the fence and it's gone. You can't get it. but yes, indeed.
Awesome. Thanks for hearing. Danielle?
Yeah, so we definitely talked about it being fun. I also think that PE needs to be taken quite seriously, like just as seriously as math or English, because PE, it doesn't just help your physical, it also helps your mental and your emotional health, provides many benefits. And I think that it needs to go more outside of, because it's recommended by the it's recommended by many places that students age 5 to 17 should be getting around an hour of exercise a day. And so that PE doesn't provide as much exercise. So I think PE should also focus on educating kids on the benefits of physical activity and tips and skills that they can learn and take into their everyday lives and continue even past school when they become adults so that they stay active, because that's what PE should be used for, keeping kids active and helping them to stay active.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Danielle, ending off on that strong point of, yes, we're making it fun, but we still need to prioritize physical education. And I think by prioritizing it, everything else will kind of fall into line. So I think that's a perfect point to kind of finish off on. So the way that our panels are going to work today is that each will have an allocated Q&A section. So we're actually going to head into the Q&As at this point. And so we have a couple of questions here for our panelists. How can you plan and build an educational facility without accommodating some kind of physical activity? A question from Catherine Danielle. So anyone who's up for answering it, how can you plan and build an educational facility without accommodating some kind of physical activity?
I think Lonnie is trying to on her mic.
I'm sorry, Daniel, can you read that again for me, please? I was trying to understand the last part.
It might actually be a remark, I think, or it can be taken as a remark.
Oh, okay, okay.
How can you, you know, build an educational facility or have education without physical activity?
Oh, okay, okay.
Any remarks on that?
I think as Danielle said, it's really easy to kind of just box out physical education. Okay, they'll find a space, their community areas, or there are other places they can use that are accessible. But most of the times they're not easily accessible. Not that they cannot be used, but the proximity, also it's very time consuming to do that throughout the school day. And so there are a lot of challenges in using facilities that are not on the school compound. And I think it's really just essentially just the value that is placed on physical education and physical activity in schools.
Great. Thanks, Lene. Heading into another question, would you guys agree, from Samuel Badri, would you guys agree that the primary school should be the focus to attract children to physical activity and sports, as if you miss them there, you generally miss them for life? So I think we've kind of reiterated that, but any final comments there? Oh, and he also adds, if yes, how can we improve curriculum delivery in the primary school with generalist teachers who may not be physical education inclined?
Yes, Daniel, can I answer? Yes, I definitely agree that the primary school is where we start. We have to start from the primary school level, and I spoke on getting to where the children and the students are at. We really need to grab them into the fold of 1, physical activity, and 2, sports. But most importantly, physical activity and then sports, because sports complements physical activity and physical activity complements sports. So we need to really get them involved and have some form of physical activity plan. And then going into your second point, we really need to, and this goes into the point of professionalizing our sporting industry. In accounts, you have an accountant doing the accountant work. In a doctor, you have a person who went and studied doctorate, again, a doctor or in the medical field. But in sports, we have persons not involved in physical education, not qualified in physical education, putting on and doing our teaching and our lecturing and involved in sport development. So this is where we really need to go to get our sporting industry professionalized and utilize students that are coming out of the campuses. Mona has a physical education program, so does St. Augustine, and we in Barbados have the sports science. And we really need to get our qualified students into these schools and into our programs so that we can really develop and provide these opportunities of physical activity, and secondly, get them participated in some form of some sport or sporting activity.
Excellent, thank you. So again, I think, and this is something that Danielle and I had spoken about as well, really prioritizing that continuing education, but also, as you're saying to here, prioritizing just ensuring that our instructors have all the tools that they need to really provide quality physical education. I'm with you. Danielle, question for you, last question. So this is from Francine Charles. She attended a meeting today that looked at the issue of getting secondary schools to get involved in physical movement, since they seem to become more self-conscious at that age. Any specific solutions?
Yes, I do have some solutions for that. So looking at students that might not want to participate because they feel self-conscious or judged, I think it's important to create a positive space, and that can be done by the teachers. They notice any negative comments, make sure that those don't happen, reward good sportsmanship, and really just making students feel comfortable participating, and also asking students what sports and what activities they would like to do, so that you get their opinion on it. So since they suggested those sports, they might feel more comfortable doing them and more comfortable participating.
Awesome, excellent. Thank you so much all. To our panelists, Danielle, to hear Lonnie, just giving you literally a snapshot again of some of the barriers pre-COVID, during COVID, some of the solutions. I think some of the key takeaways are we need to consider and acknowledge that the barriers of physical activity go beyond the individual. We need to recognize that there are also environmental factors that play a huge role, and we need to address those. We need to bring in the key stakeholders when we are planning an intervention, and the key stakeholders are the students as well. So we need to consider them. We need to consider our physical activity specialists, PE teachers. We really do need to have the right people at the table when we're continuing to prioritize physical education, physical activity, and sport. Just thinking of some other things to hear kind of really pushed on that point of being innovative and being creative. And I think now more than ever, we have to really think outside of the box. Yes. So at this point, we can't be talking about physical activity and not get moving. So I'd like to thank my panelists again, but we're now going to shift to our fit break. So fit breaks are little bursts of physical activity that you can do at school, you can do at work. Again, just to break up the amount of time that we're sitting or lying down. So we're gonna have the physical activity break now. Just to note too, that I invite everybody to stand up and move. And then we're gonna head into panel number 2, moderated by Mr. Christopher Laurie. Thanks all, let's stand up and get moving.
Hi, Daniel. Can we move on?
Yes, please, Chris. Thanks.
Great. So thank you again to our first set of panelists. We had some really brilliant contributions from Tahir, Danielle, and Lonnie, with Daniel moderating, of course. So as Daniel would have introduced me previously, my name is Christopher Laurie. I am currently working with the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Barbados to talk about this very aspect of healthy school environments. And in our second set of panelists, which we will bring to you, we want to push beyond that aspect of the school environment and talk about the wider society. As I would have shared with the panelists before and with Daniel, I find that the school is a greater mirror of the wider society, and it's important that when we talk about physical activity and helping our kids to, develop better, to learn about the importance of physical activity and nutrition and general wellness, it's also important to identify where there are limitations to facilitate this. And with our next panelists, they're really going to highlight some of these aspects. We already know that based off of the global school-based student health survey, that the prevalence of sedentary behavior pre-COVID even was already through the roof. Over an international 54 countries, the average sedentary rate was upwards of 35% among kids. And Barbados actually had the highest reported rate, unfortunately, of 65% among our kids. So 65% of our kids are not moving to the adequate and recommended standards throughout the day. And to start to solve some of these issues, or to continue to discuss solutions towards this sedentary lifestyle and to promote healthy behaviors, we have Mr. Kern Rock, who is a second-year PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies Cape Hill campus. And his specific focus is on this aspect of the built environment. So how our environment becomes a facilitator or a barrier to physical activity. And we also have Ms. Sherry Lee, who is an intern architect from Antigua and Barbados with a Bachelor of Science in Architecture and Urban Design, and currently pursuing an architectural license. And in her specific focus, she looks at how the environment, how this built environment, again, impacts society's physical, mental, and emotional well-being. And then last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Colette Cunningham-Myrie, who is a physician and senior lecturer in the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry at the University of the West Indies, Mona. And she is well equipped to be on this panel to speak about this kind of policy aspect, which we're pushing for, with postgraduate degrees and diplomas in management studies, public health, and family medicine. And Dr. Cunningham-Myrie will also help us to understand how we push to not only facilitate the physical activity in our daily lives, but the importance of setting this policy to be able to create better, more facilitating and enabling environments for this physical activity. So welcome all. And to start off with Kern, if you don't mind sharing on your aspect of this built environment, what it means and why it's important. I think your mic is off.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Chris. So to start off with, first, what is the built environment? So the built environment here refers to the human or man-made features that are present in our society or our environment that are present in communities or neighborhoods or in cities as well. And these can include buildings, streets, sidewalks, parks, open green spaces, and transit stops, like for example, your bus stops. And the design of these communities or environments are very important in moderating individual physical activity behavior. And several studies have shown within the research realm, showing that areas that the built environment is well developed and conducive for physical activity actually increases individual or personal physical activity goals or levels. And looking at the built environment, we can look at it from two perspectives. We can look at it from the perspective of the macro scale, which looks at some of the broad features like residential density, street connectivity in a specific area, or land use mix. And then we have at the micro scale level, which we more look at more the detailed features that are present within the environment, such as light poles, you have benches, you have your sidewalks, you have your traffic lights, your pedestrian signals, etc. And globally, the literature has shown that even though, for example, in communities that are less deprived, that the built environment is much more developed, at the individual level, when you look at it at the micro scale level, there are a lot of barriers that hinder physical activity, and this may be presence of litter, security issues. You have some issues with regard to derogatory graffiti present, and this may not be encouraging for persons to be physically active. So in that perspective, we must take more of a multi-sectoral approach in terms of designing our built environment, for example, here in the Caribbean. Multi-sectoral in terms of involving persons from many facets, whether it be from the research aspect, from the medical aspects, the government policy, architecture, urban planning perspective as well. And everyone needs to come together to come up with unique solutions that would help the design of our environments to be more conducive for physical activity, not only for adults, but for more importantly, children as well. Because, for example, we've all grown up during our childhood. It may not have been conducive for us to go while we're leaving school to go and play at a park. So parks were not nearby, or may not have sidewalks where the schools were. And these are some of the opportunities that exist to improve our built environment. And in talking on that note, some successful interventions that have been used in developed settings and in some developing settings as well has been the institution of more traffic calming features, institute of more lighting, and in the Caribbean here, because we're a very sunny climate here, we can institute more solar-based lighting, and that's present in some areas. So for example, here in Barbados, that's present. You have the widening of your sidewalks. That's important in terms of commuting from one point to the other and feeling comfortable nearby motorized transport. And one of the major tidbits is that of the bicycle lanes. And many have mentioned, okay, we need to institute bicycle lanes in the Caribbean. How possible is that? It is possible, but you have to link with the proper stakeholders and use the research as well to kind of inform the design and the policies with regards to that. Some other interventions can be educational campaigns to kind of sensitize persons to the importance of the built environment for children and the benefits for them as well. The development and the building of more community centers near schools, that's important. The design of more playgrounds as well. Playgrounds are very important for children, and having a playground nearby a school is very important because you want children to commute through walking, and walking is another form of physical activity, from the school to the playground safely. So you need to have infrastructure in place to allow that. Okay, I couldn't agree more, Kern. And I like the aspect of having these kind of inclusive spaces and outdoors. I know it was mentioned in the previous set of presenters on that panel, particularly from the students' perspective, that this is lacking. Even when you have these kind of accessibility to physical activity spaces, they are not as inclusive or conducive to that activity.
And Sherry, if you don't mind picking up on that point, I know that for you, it's very important to have outdoor spaces. And why is it? What are these outdoor spaces about and why are they important?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So from the perspective of architecture and urban design, we prioritize green spaces for the physical, mental, social, and environmental advantages, right? So the type of green space, because there are a variety, that directly supports an active and healthy lifestyle within communities are public parks. So this is the one I'm going to focus on today. Right, so public parks are an important aspect to community development due to the variety of benefits they offer. They are multifunctional and inclusive spaces which promote exercise, recreation, and relaxation. Once it's designed adequately, they will create an inviting atmosphere due to the type of vegetation that's present, the strategic placement of that vegetation, as well as the amenities that it would offer, which are some of what Karen would have stated before, like park benches, garbage recipients, etc. For them to also be considered to be fully inclusive, the implementation of infrastructure to ensure the accessibility of all types of mobility is essential so that everyone can go to the park, despite whether they are using a wheelchair or if they need assistance with walking or if they can do it as normal. So parks provide space for diverse forms of physical activity. It can range from Tai Chi to aerobics and so many more. Having a public access park is very important because not all the members within a community are going to be able to gain access to a gym or maybe partake in extracurricular sporting activities, as these can sometimes tend to be a little bit on the expensive side. So as we want to form a society with healthy lifestyles all year round, despite the age group, public parks can really help in this aspect. And also, as Lana would have mentioned before, what we see a lot in Antigua is people tend to, and I'm sure it can be mirrored around the Caribbean, that we tend to get fit for a social event or maybe get in shape for carnival. And you kind of want to get people out of that habit and more in the habit of, okay, this is part of my daily routine, just like I drink water every day or I brush my teeth, you know, increase the physical activity in that sense. So as parks designate zones for recreational activities, it also allows for the use of roads and sidewalks and corners to be for transitory purposes, which therefore establishes safer and more livable streets. Because I know I've seen in certain residential areas, kids playing in the road, you may have some really fast moving traffic, and that can also cause a safety problem. So also, in neighborhoods which have smaller plots for residential land use, what tends to happen is yard space for greenery and recreation is usually sacrificed for the dwelling space. So public infrastructure in these areas, such as parks, would be deeply appreciated as they provide space for safe play and exercise, and simultaneously introduce cleaner air. Additionally, parks can encourage social cohesion by providing space for interaction and integration. They can be used for as a meeting space and events, as well as parties once things do go back to normal. And opportunities for organized community commercial activities can also be offered, such as urban farming. This is an industry that encourages small-scale agriculture, which promotes healthy eating and entrepreneurship simultaneously. As an example, a section of the park could be allocated for the production and sale of the produce. Also, as research would suggest, prolonged time outdoors, as many of the people on the panel have already stated, amongst greenery and fresh air can help protect against mood disorders and stress-related issues. Parks can help with the psychological restoration of its users, and provide them with respite for overstimulated minds. Also, another advantage of having vegetation is the green infrastructure within parks can assist with disaster resilience through flood mitigation by acting as a basin for excess rainwater, which I know at home is a big deal. Whenever we have heavy rains, you're almost bound to see flooding. Even if it's not even that heavy, we know that certain areas are going to flood because of the lack of proper drainage infrastructure. Also, having an increase of vegetation within communities can help to lower the local atmospheric temperatures. By having cooler areas, it then removes the need for air conditioning within residences. And this can be considered as an economic benefit because cooling costs are relatively high throughout the Caribbean. And lastly, during the planning phase of the park, if a participatory approach is taken to increase community engagement of the residents, this can help to enhance their sense of ownership or pride and identity of the park, and therefore they will want to take care of it and treat it as if it were their own like front yard or backyard. And in conclusion, with adequate maintenance and governance of a public area like this, it can just help to overall improve our communities by integrating physical activities, market, and culture.
Great, thank you so much for that, Sherry. We want to have a special contribution from Dr. Cunningham-Myrie to wrap us up with some key recommendations for policy. As Kern and Sherry would have pointed out, we have to move beyond the aspect of necessarily victimizing individuals for their lack of access to physical activity or their inability to access, attain, and maintain healthy behavioral changes and lifestyles. So especially with respect to chronic diseases, Dr. Myrie, what would some of your recommendations, if you had 2 or 3 key recommendations for policy and how such that kind of implementation can facilitate this promotion of healthy living? Oh, I'm seeing that unfortunately Dr. Cunningham-Myrie was not able to contribute or stay on the call, but we will certainly pick up from what both Kern and Sherry said. And in terms of pushing for this policy, I just want to reiterate the notion that we have to have this kind of participatory action in anything that we do. It is so important when, no matter what you're doing, to have that buy-in from your stakeholders. And when we talk about the stakeholders, that is necessarily the people who live and have to interact within the environment. If they don't have that type of buy-in into what is being created for them, they are less likely to utilize the space. So as much as we are pushing towards that change in environment, that change in space, that facilitation of this healthy school and healthy communities, we have to talk to the people, we have to bring them into that consultation process and not just push things on them. So I'm seeing Dr. Cunningham-Myrie back on the call. Are you able to contribute on the aspect of policy, Dr. Myrie?
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming through.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
I think, Dr. Myrie, you're skipping a bit. Maybe if your camera was off, the audio might come through.
Is it better? Is it better now?
Hi. Yes.
Oh.
Maybe if you had your camera off, the audio might run a little more smoothly.
My camera is off?
No, if you did turn it off, it would be easier to run the audio from you.
All right. Are you hearing me?
Yes, it's coming through smooth now.
All right. Let's just hope. It's a very short presentation that I have to do. Are you able to see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we're seeing it.
All right. I'm so sorry. Apologies to everyone, and thanks so much for having invited me to participate in this webinar. And I want to just start off by reminding us really what physical activity is about. Because I heard in the earlier presentations mention of things like sports and exercise, but physical activity really encompasses so much more, right? Any bodily movement that produced from the any body movement, you have energy expenditure from the skeletal muscles really constitute physical activity. And that's very important for the age group that we are speaking about, children and adolescents, okay? So the next slide really is also just to make sure we understand what health policy is. And really these are health goals that can be either at the international or national or local levels that really helps to, specify the decisions, the plans, and the actions that are to be undertaken. Very often we hear about health policies at the national level, but we have to also remember that even though you have governance at the national level, many times what really makes things happen is what happens at the local or community level. And sometimes the health policies have to be quite explicit as well. And when they are, the more explicit they are, the more it helps to clarify what are some of those values that you want that policy to be based on. It may help to define even a vision for where one wants to go, and even the objectives and the priorities in order to achieve the vision. So it's very good when you can not only develop a policy, but make it as specific as possible. I want to introduce another concept which you may have heard of before, healthy public policy. And it's a term used for those who have studied public health, who would have heard about health promotion and the Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion, followed up by the Caribbean Charter for Health Promotion, the first in 1986 and the latter in 1993. And it's important, that whole society thing about what we really want to do is promote health everywhere. So related to our topics today of the school environment and the community environment, you want to promote health directly through the use of policy. And also, you will find that some of those healthy public policies are not specific to the health center, but they may be related to other sectors. For example, I believe Ms. Lee came on before me, an architect, architects so often help us out with her urban planning and community designs and how homes are structured. So you really want policies that are not only health specific or within that sector, but also related to other sectors, intersectoral. Now, my task today was this. Given our Caribbean context, what policies or regulations should policymakers prioritize to ensure that our children can live in an environment that is conducive to being active? So I want to start off by saying we are therefore in our conversations wanting to consider school-based policies as well as community-based policies. And also, we have to consider what are the environments we are speaking to for these policies. Because environment is not only physical. You can be in a physical space, but the social environment in that space can either be something that facilitates the physical activity or forms a barrier. And social is very important. Previous speakers spoke about sensitivities, gender issues related to the environment. So they're all integrated. The other thing I threw in today was, given our current context, sometimes the environment is one where you're in person, face to face. You can touch each other or bump each other, elbow bump. But we have to consider the virtual environment. And again, I heard other presenters mention that. So my main task, prioritization of policies, and just some suggestions. In my own mind, I think we need to look at 4 different areas. National development, talk about some key features in terms of prioritizing. What should some features be that you look out for prioritization of policies? What are the guiding principles for the features that will drive policy development? And also we have to consider monitoring environment. So I'm going to expand on each right now very quickly. In terms of prioritizing, you have to ensure that they are consistent with whatever the national development goals are. So the Caribbean made up of different countries. Yeah, there may be common themes or common development goals, but you may find that there may be unique goals. So it's important, although we speak as a collective group, that when we get down to the individual countries, we look at what's specific for each of those countries. Many of our countries have adopted the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You know that there are about 17 of them, I believe. Number 3 is the one that speaks to good health and well-being, but they're all integrated. So there are others, and I just give a few examples here, that also influence physical activity in terms of sustainable cities and communities. I think that was number 1. I left a number out. Quality of education. Number 4, peace, justice, and strong institutions. It's very hard to exercise and be angry all the time. So it's really a good thing to help with relaxation and good social connectedness. This is my final slide. And so in this slide, what I want to talk about are those features that I think countries should look at as helping to guide how they prioritize their policies. And these features could either serve as a facilitator for physical activity or a barrier. So the policies should be acceptable. We're talking things like sex or gender, which is a social construct, culturally appropriate, age appropriate, and there should be the quality of whatever is being offered in terms of physical activity has to be considered. It should be, the policy should be, there should be availability as a feature of the policy for physical activity. Sufficient number of spaces, sufficient types of spaces, and not only the environment in terms of physical, but you need the support, the human resources to go along with the use of these various spaces, these various environments, including that social environment. You'll be surprised how much there are persons trained, coaches that can influence socially how people connect when they are doing physical activity. Accessibility is important. Where are the spaces located and the types of locations? One has to consider under the underserved versus wealthy. Affordability, how do we maximize physical activity per dollar investment? Because sometimes that investment is by a government. Sometimes it may be a school that is a private school. It's not all the while that somebody has to be out of pocket. Sometimes things are subsidized, or if you're looking at even in the community, we can use our community spaces for free. But those are the things that we have to consider. Another feature is adaptability, adjusting to, by that I mean adjusting to new conditions or new uses and purposes. And this whole pandemic has taught many of us about adaptability. Now, the guiding principles for prioritizing according to those features. In my own mind, I see these 6 key principles. Inclusivity. And in inclusivity, we also have to remember things like persons with special needs. I don't know if I heard anybody mention that earlier, because our schools don't always have persons that can walk easily. Sometimes we have persons in our schools that have hearing impairment or sight impairment. So these are things that we must also consider. Inclusivity, equity, of course, fairness across all different sectors, collaboration that has been mentioned before, intersectoral, all of society. We must consider safety and security as those policies are rolled out. Creativity and innovation has been mentioned earlier. And the one that I'm interested very much in, because I'm an epidemiologist by training, is evidence-based. And so even for the school policies, a lot of times schools have programs and their curricula speak to different sporting activity or physical exercise activities. But a lot of times there's no measurement. Students come in and you don't know what their weight for height for their ages, because it's a little different for children and adolescents versus adults. Those are things we should be measuring, and we should be able over time to assess changes in people's weight for height or other measures of obesity, for example. And there should be data collection. So this is an area that I think really needs a lot of work, because once you then present evidence, it really will then inform policymakers as to whether they keep doing what they're doing or they change track, either increasing something, bringing in something new, or getting rid of something that is no longer relevant. So the final thing I have here is, in all of this, one must develop monitoring and evaluation indicators for monitoring and evaluation. A lot of programs, a lot of policies, these things are written in, but many times it's the monitoring and evaluation component, which is it's usually tied in with evidence-based, because you would have measurable indicators. A lot of times that's what's missing. And so things are rolled out, everybody feels good, but you don't really know if the thing is being monitored properly, and we don't pay attention often enough to evaluating what has been done. So those are what I wanted to share with you all today, and thanks so much for listening.
That was so excellent, Dr. Cunningham Mary. Thank you so much. Thank you for stressing on the aspect of having that inclusive environment as well. We know that not the only reason, but one of the big limitations within the built space is this aspect of if all persons are able to access it. I think we take for granted, we talk about the ableist society, that everyone will have co-equal access to these spaces. And it's definitely something that Kern and Sherry would have highlighted as well. Sorry.
Somebody asked me to share the physical activity side. Is it the one with the diagram?
If you pull back up your slides, we should be able to ascertain. I'm seeing a contribution in the meanwhile as well, that within the Bahamas, there is a disability inclusion consultant within the University of the Bahamas space, working on bridging these gaps between the physical activity space, the built environment, and building a more enabling society for disabled and physically challenged persons. So that is an excellent contribution and key recommendation moving forward. We always want to include persons, especially when we talk about our Caribbean environment, whereby we have multiple persons. The majority, actually, unfortunately, of persons living with chronic diseases, which can affect their physical capacity to operate within these spaces, we definitely have to consider having more inclusive environments. So if on that point, Sherry or Kern or Dr. Cunningham Mary, if you can contribute, there was a question raised by the Q&A segment where it asks about the private sector. So we know that policy has to come from a governmental standpoint, but how do we get the private sector to invest in these spaces?
So I'll start. How we get the private sector to invest, firstly, one, you have to show what benefits they can get out of it as well as the community. So one way of doing that is through evidence-based. So one, through research, you show, you conduct studies in the benefits of implementing outdoor spaces to their businesses. That's one opportunity. Another can be converting public open spaces to, like, for example, for playgrounds, provides opportunities for businesses as well for their commercial activity. But these businesses that may be encouraged to be situated near these playgrounds or these built environment interventions should be those that are appropriate for example, for children. So for example, you would not want a bar that's close to a playground. That would be a definite no-no. We're all encouraging healthy eating. So one potential can be converting part of a park space to an urban garden. And I know in the panel, we've spoken about this before. Sherry, I think Sherry mentioned this as well. And Sherry can elaborate more on that. And I think that that's a very, that provides a lot of opportunities for the private sector to collaborate with not only the government, but from a research point of view, collaborating with researchers that are doing work in the Caribbean. I know Dr. Kana Marie, she's doing work in Jamaica as well, has done some work in Jamaica as well, with the built environments as well. So built environment researchers are now coming up, and you should see more work coming up in the future. Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Sherry, do you have any further comments on that point?
Not really. I think Kern really he hit the nail on the head right there. All I would say is you would see that there are certain businesses that like to, for instance, at the YMCA at home, on the exterior walls, certain businesses use that area as promotion. So that helps. And if they are able to donate some portion of their proceeds to the maintenance of the field or the public space, that can also be just a small way for them to invest in the public space. But we would also want to make sure that it's advertisement that is conducive to a healthy lifestyle, for instance, not soft drink companies, that sort of thing, but healthy eating if it is, or I don't know, medical services, etc.
Yes, excellent point. I really like both of the contributions, Kern and Sherry, when you were saying that, you know, the kind of businesses and advertising spaces that go into these environments have to match the health promotion aspect of what these spaces are intended for. So we know that children, especially now within the digital space, everybody's online for school, that children are being exposed more and more to these ads from companies promoting items, products, and services which are not conducive, whether it be alcohol, food and beverage items which are high in salt, fat, and sugar. And ultimately, yes, we do want to support business, but at the same time, it cannot be to the detriment of the persons who we are promoting, purporting to serve. And on that point, Dr. Cunningham-Myrie, I'm seeing that from the comment section that students also should be part of this change and part of this movement towards a healthy school environment in particular. Can you suggest ways in which we can become more involved as citizen scientists towards this monitoring and evaluation of our environments? Are you still there, Dr. Cunningham-Myrie?
Yes, I'm still here. Did you direct a question to me?
Yes, sorry. So
I'm sorry. You were in and out. I didn't hear everything. Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure thing. So one of the comments in this section was making the suggestion towards using students as part of this monitoring and evaluation process. And I was saying that how is it that within our schools, within our communities, that we can have these kind of whistleblowers, if you want to say, or these evaluators that we build outwards, and to create this more inclusive environment, not just for the people utilizing the space, but how do we you know, get persons to be encouraged to take care of their own environs and to be able to make the recommendations where needed.
Yes, I actually think that's an excellent suggestion stroke question. And what you're seeking to do is change a culture, right? And that is where even the whole collaborative thing comes along, where it is going to be important that we in terms of policies at least, and policies are never a single person, it's always a group of different stakeholders that come together, discuss a matter. And usually, you know, governments like to set up committees, etc., and invite persons from different key stakeholder groups to do that. And I believe if we go with innovation as one of the guiding principles, that we can include our students and community members as part of understanding what is going on to make that change. So I think it's an excellent idea. Not many places have done that, taught persons what to look for, which is key for gathering the data, but I think it's possible that it can be done. And it's just a matter of, just as we do social marketing for anything else, that we'd make a conscious effort to invite both the students and, as I say, the community members in. And as that's all with the goal of really changing culture. You measuring things, you young people use your phones and your watches far more than I did in my time. So half of the people running are also looking at their arm to see whether they're doing X amount of steps and so on. So it's just a matter of changing culture, and I think it can be done, but you just have to make that first step.
Yes, I fully agree. One of the final questions before we hand over for closing comments was this aspect, as you started to allude to, Dr. Kaniamairi, of the COVID environment and how do we build back better moving forward. So in terms of, especially when we want to capture those persons who cannot access or have a disproportionate access to these spaces, how does the built environment, how do we make it better and more inclusive moving forward during COVID and post-COVID?
Wow, you're throwing me some hard questions today.
That's what we're all here for, to discuss. So Sherry and Karen will pick up. Yes.
So you're real. So just specifically, I think you asked me a double barrel question. Tell me the first part. Okay,
so in terms of the COVID environment, our present environment, where we are looking to facilitate these healthy environments that are inclusive, how do we implement and institutionalize, because you did say we are trying to change the culture, it has to be an institutionalizational change. How do we make these environments better and more inclusive, especially for persons who find it difficult to access?
I am a firm believer in dialogue. I feel once there is dialogue, once there is communication, once there is a monitoring aspect, which is usually the sort of role of us as advocates, for example, at HCC, or even governments. Once there is communication, then you will pick up what's not going so right and what's really working. And that is one of the strengths of social media, I find. Even though it can be overwhelming with information, it allows us to almost instantaneously understand what's happening in various spaces. Politicians use it a lot, and even in this COVID environment, in many different countries, and let us say, I know in Barbados, I'm sure it's happening in Jamaica here. If something is not happening in a particular space, like in the community or the virtual school environment, even if it is a person does not connect with you, that is also giving you feedback. So when we are losing our students in our classrooms, that's an important thing. So a tutor is able to know that I am not in touch with A, B, C, or D. And therefore, you then have to have the response mechanism to those that we're losing touch with. And also asking about these very same things about environments. Are you exercising in the space that you are in virtually, around your home, etc.? Are persons sick while you can't do anything? So I think, to me, communication, getting the lines of communication going, whether through social media or otherwise, that's the first step in terms of ensuring we can adapt for the environment. For example, when we look at COVID and just being able to have classes, online classes for students from our universities down to our primary schools, it is really through communication that you picked up that some persons had online access, some did not have online access, the conditions in some people's homes where they could, it was not, appropriate for classes. So I think the same thing for physical activity. We need to start to ask those sorts of questions as well. And sometimes you get a suggestion from the very persons in the groups that you're talking to say, hey, I live in a similar situation to you, but this is what I could do. in my space to be physically active. So that is the COVID lockdown type of curfew type of space. Well, transitioning out, I think we need to start planning from now for when we get back out. You know, we're not thinking, because there's a whole psychological side to this pandemic that we're going to have to really consider. We're getting people moving from just being so sedentary through COVID to getting back into virtual, you know, physical face-to-face. And I think as we need to all start to do a sort of think tank thing as to what are some of the possible barriers we may have to coming back out into the spaces, to assess those spaces at this time. Many of the spaces, the physical spaces, I should say, are empty. And we should probably use the opportunity to assess quality and those other sorts of things. Where are we in terms of equipment? So we started planning ahead. Where are we now, baseline, and what can we do? But again, it's going to take people having an idea of where they are at, which is where the evidence is important. Where are we at now with schools in terms of those spaces, in terms of the personnel, in terms of the types of activities that we offer? Not just a curriculum on sports and competitive stuff, but, you know, using a break time and having somebody have music going through the PA system, so that when you get a 20-minute break, you can have some music going and people can exercise in that time. So, you know, I think we need to start to think about that now. And us as advocates, especially us as a HCC, we can start that process, talking and then planning to then, you know, move ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Karen and Sherry, do you want to wrap up on that?
So I'd just like to say one way forward in terms of further developing our business environments is that collaboration between sectors, between the private sector, the public sector, and researchers as well, to provide that evidence base for future interventions. And it not only benefits the elderly population or the adult population, but in particular our children. And this is important to help reduce the burden of NCDs that are developing later on in life for them as well. So that collaboration is desperately needed across sectors. Yes.
All right, Sherry, any closing remarks?
Yes, basically what has already been said. One of the most important things is that we all collaborate together, because one specific industry is not going to be able to know the answer for everything. So I think just through collaboration, we really would be able to tackle anything that's thrown at us as a society and a region.
Okay, thank you so much. And I definitely agree. Moving forward, as Dr. Cunningham-Myrie would have emphasized over and over, we do need to have this kind of multifaceted, multidimensional approach to building back better, and particularly from COVID. And we also need to implement policies to facilitate this activity. It's not sufficient to expect that when you give recommendations to individuals that they will follow up on having this active lifestyle, because if the environment is not conducive to do so, as we've been saying and hearing from Sherry, Kern, and Dr. Myrie, the behavioral change which we're trying to facilitate is so much harder, or near impossible even. And using that kind of evidence-based approach is also important. We do know that the environment does have possibilities, but there are also limitations. And we do have to understand that and have those kind of principled approaches to inform how we can build back better. So on that point, I do want to hand over to Brother Atu Radcliffe, a representative from the Caribbean Sports Development Agency, to wrap our session.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much to the panel. My brother Chris, you did an excellent job moderating that panel. I am representing CSDA today, and it's my pleasure to provide some closing remarks. I am proud to be in collaboration with the Caribbean Health Coalition and the Youth Coalition. You guys should be pleased with your effort. We should be pleased with our effort. I believe this was a necessary and timely presentation of a webinar experience, and it's a fantastic presentation of a webinar experience. I want to offer a couple of things before I invite the presenters or panelists to leave us with a takeaway, because I personally believe, I'm convicted about this, that part of our challenge is our call to action. And we are talking about movement, and we are talking about physical movement for health, but we also need to talk about theoretical or implementing movement so that we can move this agenda and advocacy forward. So we will have those call to actions in a little bit. But before we do so, I want to touch on a couple of things very quickly. Albert Einstein once said, things should be made as simply as possible, but no simpler. As I listened to this webinar today, there were a lot of complex ideas on display. And I challenged myself to see if I can bring any simplicity to that amount of complexity. And I concluded that it is necessary complexity, because some things can only be so simple and no more. And because this thing is such a serious challenge and it's multifactorial, it requires a certain amount of depth and deep consideration. And I believe that was on full display today. There's another quote that I would like to share, or I would like to paraphrase, and it was by, I think he's a German psychologist, Kurt Lewin. He said, there's no practice like a good theory. Oftentimes, especially academics are chastised for theorizing, and with good reasons, but it is worth it for us to spend some time thinking about difficult problems, real problems, before we engage in action. But soon after, we should be keen to engage in action. And the last quote that I would like to invoke is one by Joseph Joubert. And he says, it is better for us to debate a question without settling it than to settle a question without debating it. I saw a lot of congruence between what was presented today, but I also saw some disagreements. And I paid attention to that because oftentimes in our culture, we are afraid of disagreements, but disagreements allow us to solve the problem in a more complete way. Because we in our, one of my mentors and the founder of CSDA, Mark Mungle, he likes to encourage us not to engage in silos. And that is why at CSDA, we value partnerships, because there are different perspectives, very important perspectives and expertise that can help us to solve the problem in a more comprehensive way. And I believe we accomplished all those things today. So I urge us to take the lessons of the panelists, take the input and the data that was presented that is very important. In some cases, frightening. 65% of children in Barbados are not active enough, and it's a similar number throughout the Caribbean. But we need to also consider Dr. Cunningham's contribution in terms of the nuances in different spaces. So we especially coming from this history of colonialism, we like to talk about best practice, and that is good, that is fine, that's good science. But we also need to consider fit practice. So we need to spend some time ensuring that our strategies and techniques are appropriate for the populations we serve and we are advocating for and to. So with that said, I would like to start us off with my call to action. I urge us to think, I urge us to innovate, I urge us to act, reflect, and then repeat that cycle until we arrive at a place and a space where physical activity, movement is the order of the day. I have a very important announcement to make, but before I do so, I call on the panelists to leave us with something as we prepare to come off of the call in the form of a call to action. Anyone can
I'll start off if you don't mind.
I would love that.
Yes, for us to be advocates, we have to walk the talk. And so my single thing would be, we all ourselves need to be engaged in physical activity. Because once you do and you realize all the benefits, then it will make you a stronger advocate.
Thank you. Walk the talk.
Yeah, so I just had something to take away. I just wanted to remind everyone that it's never too late to start being physically active. It doesn't have, if you weren't active as a kid or as a teenager, you can always start now, and you don't need a big space. You don't need a lot of equipment. And there's a variety of exercises or activities that you can do to be active. So really it's quite easy to be active and to get into a routine of it. And we should all focus on starting being active now if we weren't before.
Thank you very much, Danielle. It's never too late to start. Walk the talk, it's never too late to start. Brother Tahir?
Thank you, Brother Atto. As we are gathered here virtually, and the Caribbean is going through one of the most challenging trials yet, from the battling of the COVID-19 pandemic to now the combating of climate change and battling of climate change with St. Vincent, and us, the work that we are doing in combating NCDs and childhood obesity. This is the time. This is the time where we must put all hands on deck and work together to achieve for the common good, for the better of our youth, for the better of our future, for the future of our Caribbean, for one Caribbean. Now, more than ever before, we understand the importance of healthy lifestyles and exercise. And now more than ever, we must get more people in the realm of exercising and participating in sports. Thank you, Brother Atto, just off the top of my head.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that.
I think it is important also to encourage and support children to be active so that it becomes a way of life. And my parting words really are that physical activity begins at home, in the community, and where children are at most times of the day.
Yeah, thank you. It's very powerful. Brother Kern?
Thank you, Brother Atto. My closing remarks would be to encourage group physical activity. Sometimes exercising alone isn't the most conducive thing for everyone, and sometimes it can be demotivating, but to have others around you to exercise is very encouraging and allows you to exercise and reach further heights than you could ever dream of for your goals for physical activity benefits. So thank you.
Very important, very important. Sister Sherry, sorry.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just to close off, in order to create this healthy lifestyle of physical activity, it's something that needs to be continued, as Lani would have said, starts at home. You go through the school doing it, and also you should be able to practice it also within the community, and it should be accessible despite your physical ability or economic ability.
Very, very important. Thank you all for those powerful takeaways. I hope that the participants benefited as much as I did from your wonderful presentations, ideas, and insight. And I hope that we can do similar things moving forward. I just want to give one final plug for the power of socialization. Brother Samuel Badri, who is he's a graduate of the University of Trinidad and Tobago. He spoke about the primary schools and maybe even younger than that, because when we socialize certain attributes, they can stay with us for a very long time. And more importantly, at this time, I would like to announce that there is a Zumba opportunity. And I say an opportunity because we get to move, but we also get to support our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So this is taking place on April the 17th at 10 a.m. And there's all the proceeds from this event goes to the Rotary Club of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The flyer is displayed on the screen, and you can just scan where it says register here, and you will be in with an opportunity to get moving with Danny and Carleen and contribute, show your solidarity, walk the talk in terms of supporting our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I think that concludes my role here.
Thank you, Brother Atu. So another huge thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much to moderator Christopher Laurie, to Brother Atu, and the Caribbean Sport and Development Agency for partnering on this excellent webinar. I'm walking away smiling because there's so much promise. I think so much insight was shared. So thank you all. I'm hoping that you can join us on Saturday just to get moving for our brothers and sisters. And just to leave you with one final thought, every single move counts, so keep moving. Thanks all. Have a great rest of the day.